Hi everybody, Tanse Adam Nitigasin Kaptagana Achania. Hi, I'm Autumn from Central First Nations. I work at the Office of Tree Commissioner as a mentor under education. I work along with Amy and Shar. Our next presenter is Chris Scribe. He has a bachelor's in education, a master's in education, and I had to Google this, a PhD in education as well. I'll try getting the name of it. He is Nakota Nehewan from the Carrie-to-Kettle Nakota Otsale Treaty 4 territory. And he is an amazing advocate for Indigenous education and Indigenous knowledge. Scribe grounds himself in the knowledge he passed, Scribe grounds himself in the knowledge he passes down and has been passed down to him by his father and his grandmother. So everybody, please welcome Chris Scribe.
All right. I think I'm on. That means that, thanks for that, like lovely, awesome introduction. Autumn Baptiste, Dr. Autumn, appreciate it. And for the millions viewing from across the world, good day. Really cool. I see my niece now, he's right into it. So I'm gonna tell stories about him. You know, I'm gonna make sure that I bring them forward like you're supposed to do to your brother-in-laws. You know, it's what you're supposed to do. Yeah, so thank you, thank you, Jolie, for that wicked awesome presentation just before. I'm following some of your work and along with some of that. And man, I'm sorry for the kids that are in the room. I've been away from the school and teaching, so I'm gonna do my best not to swear, but that dudney, that guy's gotta go, man. We gotta, it's funny because my brother-in-law had to salute that dudney and salute John A. because he used to be an RCMP. And if we start, we're gonna tell the story of how the RCMP started in this country. They were put together to attack and destroy and Indian people and eradicate us from this country. Just kidding. We're not going to go there. I got fun, awesome stories for each and every one of you. This is going to be a good time for all of us. So I hope. But I'm really thankful. Tansa gumagante Scribe nitsigasan kinaseo si piuchinia and how konabi togahe amani amachiabi chega gena gitchataya hibi. So as Adia had said, I'm Nakota Cree. My home territory from my Cree side, my Musham's land and Nimusham's territory, and where he lived and breathed and hunted and fished and trapped was Kinaseo Sipi, also known as Norway House Cree Nation. And that land was basically, it was the hub for the fur trade, and the rivers and the river systems were the funnel that transferred all of the fur all throughout the north, and the Hudson Bay and the Northwest Company started in those spaces. So it's important that I recognize that. And the title that I'm going to be talking about is a love story with the Queen. I did that for a few reasons. A, because this is the OTC. We're talking about treaty today, and we're talking about storytelling, and I think that's a fitting title for what I want to share with each and every one of you. I'm also a tribal member of the Chegagin, Carrie-to-Kettle, Nakota Oyate, and that's in southern Saskatchewan in Treaty 4. I was raised and a band custom member of the Palmaker Cree Nation and adopted into the community as well, into Palmaker, which is just west of North Battleford, not too far, about 45 minutes. And have a lot of relatives over there with the Tatusis family. So very proud, and always really acknowledge that. So connections to Treaty 4, 5, and 6, and had shacked up in Treaty 7, 8, 9, and 10. And also in Treaty 1 and Treaty 2. And I'm just kidding. That's a joke. It's not. Just really trying to connect, to all levels. That's we're relational people. We're making relatives. That's what we're doing here today. So this is what we're doing, is we make relatives and we laugh and we joke and we have these conversations. So I start with that and I do those different pieces. And I'm invited here today to do a little talk about storytelling and the power of story and what it means to me and how we move through this and why it's important and relevant right now. And I'm going to share that with all of you to the best of my knowledge. Just before I start that, though, I want to make sure and invite all my relatives, to join us in this conversation. I'm sitting in an office right now. I even put up a star quilt behind me, and it's over a window just to show and prove that I'm Indigenous. My star quilt is actually over a window, yeah, that's what it is. So anyways, my backdrop, it's got, yeah, Jolie's isn't over her window. Jolie's got hers on the side. Uh, I don't know, man. Let's see your status card. Yeah, no, just kidding. But so this is what you're gonna get, is you're gonna get this conversation as we go. It's gonna bounce around and do these different things, but in the end, it's all gonna make sense, hopefully anyway. But yeah, so I want to tell story, and the reason why this is something that I value is that the power of story is really what our foundation is in terms of who we are as Indigenous people. And the type of education that I received growing up, being raised, so I'm not a fluent Cree speaker, but I was raised by my grandmother, who was Basimu, who was a Nakota. In my home, where I grew up, inside of that home, that was what was shared. That was the knowledge and perspectives that were put out there, was this Nakota understanding and a Nakota worldview. And as soon as I stepped out of our trailer where we grew up, it was boom, you're slapped in the face with Cree and all over, which is awesome. If you ever get slapped by a Cree, it's a good thing. Ask my Nistao, he knows how that is, and it's like knowledge. There's knowledge in that Bannock slap that happens over there. So that's super awesome and deadly. So, but I was out there and it was all around. So everywhere that it was, it was around me. So this Cree spirit of who I am, and the Cree language that I speak is a wide dialect Cree. And I'm not Y dialect at all. We're N, and TH is my connection to Cree, but the only one I know is Y, because that's where I grew up and that's what was around me. And it's really, really significant that we share that. And I'm going to share a few stories. I got a Prezi that I'll share as well, and we'll go through that. But I really want to just kind of put this out there. Next week on Wednesday, I'll be, I'm not quite a doctor yet, Audie, I'm not there yet, but next week on Wednesday, after that, it'll be Dr. Scribe. And what happens after that is I start acting too good. And then I don't show up for storytellings. And, I start writing research grants and I get them, and my head explodes to all different levels. And, I stop talking to the common folk, and just kidding. But once that's done, that chapter's done, I just want to be able to tell people that the knowledge and the education that I got from my grandmother, from my father, my adopted parents, that knowledge far exceeds any knowledge that I get from colonial institution. And I really truly believe that with all my heart and soul, that that's where we get, and that's how we're going to save our people from the scenarios and the situations that we are in, is that if we uplift the spirit of Indigenous knowledge, indigeneity, which includes storytelling and which includes the stuff that I'm doing here. So there we go. It's too bad that that my Nista is actually the one that was messing with the chats. Those of you that know, there's there was 160 people when Jolie was on, and now there's only 118. So all those other 50 people, all her cousins, they left. And now it's just the real people that are dedicated to this work that are on there. Just kidding. All right. So yeah, it was my brother-in-law that messed up the chat. Now we can't interact that way. I usually really get into it and ask the questions and answer them all really deadly funny and like to the point, and we truth bomb them. But since there's no chat, I'm gonna tell lies the whole time, and I'm not gonna be able to do any of that. I'm just teasing you. Put your hand down. I know that we can enable it if you want, but you can delete those other things too. Dr. Heinbecker, I seen that name up there too. So okay. So just in case you're wondering, what the heck, sorry, there's kids in the room. What the heck did we sign up for? Who is this guy? This is not what I expected. We just went through a real deadly, like inspiring cultural presentation. Now, all of a sudden, Chris is just messing it all up, Well, too bad. I'm on, you have to stick with me now. All right, so there we go. This is the presentation. I'm going to start, and as I start with this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a story with you as I do this presentation for everybody, and it's going to be the pre-K to grade 12 presentation. So all of you ones that want to do an adult presentation somewhere down the line, that's when I drop the F-bombs and, just get worse, but now you're going to get Mr. Scribe, the teacher back in the day. So here we go. This is where you are. This is what we are. And this is what we're going to talk about. So the title of this, when I was asked by Audie, like to say, can you come and join us? Can you be a part of this conversation? Can you do some storytelling? I was like, well, yeah. I said, there's probably better, more awesome storytellers out there in the world. But I can definitely share some perspective and share some story as best as I can. So this is what it is. In 1894, there was a young child that was 40 pounds. He was 3 foot tall, and he was the age of 6 years old. And this young child's name, his name was Huzizi. His name was Awamni Hukshina. And his parents dressed him up in beautiful regalia, put on some brand new Nakota, a beautiful Nakota shirt put together by his mother. His father made sure that he was rocking some of those wicked, awesome Nakota moccasins. And they traveled up to Regina from Assiniboine Reserve, which is now Carry the Kettle. And as they traveled up into this space, they went to a place called the Regina Industrial School. By law in Canada, all of our children were forced into these schools and these education systems. The goal of them, and Edgar Dewdney was talked about earlier, who was the Indian commissioner alongside his bro, John A. Macdonald, the first Prime Minister of Canada. They put together this plan, and the plan was to create a system, a weaponized system, to take people like my grandfather, Wamni Hukshina, on the picture on the left that you see there, and create him into the image of the body of politic, to assimilate him. And the goal of this, and it derived from this foundational place called Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania, where in Carlisle Indian School, they had this vision or mission statement. And the mission statement at Carlisle Indian School was to kill the Indian, save the man. So they adopted that weaponized system of education to create what you see here, because they didn't see success being the indigenous spirit and culture and knowledge. They seen the success as the one on the left dressed up to be an industrial laborer, to go to a military school and to be into these places, to cut your hair, to speak English, and to forget your traditional ways of knowing. It's important that we talk about that, because when my great grandfather, Wamni Hukshina, Charles Ryder Jr. from the Carry the Kettle, Chegagen, Nakota, Oyade, when he went to that school, He was full on Indigenous. That was my first relationship with education. My family's first relationship with colonial education was him in 1894. And what they tried to do and what they wanted to do is they wanted to replicate the mission. They wanted to meet the objectives of the Carlisle Indian School and create this space and place to kill the Indian and save the man. And not only did they do that, they did a lot of different things as well here in Canada that were spearheaded by these politicians at the time, like Edgar Dewdney and like John A. Macdonald. So part of them is they also made sure that they stood up in the House of Commons and they passed legislation such as the Indian Act. And the Indian Act was in place to oppress and to make sure that it coincided with schools to make sure that we remained oppressed. And it's important for us to acknowledge that and to use that. Now, throughout this presentation, I'm going to use the term Indian a lot of times. And the reason why I do that is to remind myself that that's what Canada refers to me as in the Indian Act, as well as when we signed treaty, that's what we were referred to as well. It's an English word. And it's not meant to be derogatory, but I do use it for that purpose and intent. It's a reminder for myself. It's also a reminder to all the relatives that I'm speaking to that we are still classified as that in the Canadian worldview, as well as the intent and purpose of this. So I want to talk about this as being a love story with the Queen, meaning that we engaged in this relationship with the Queen and the Crown, not for this purpose, but in order to share the land and to live with one another, to do that work. But there were other factors that were done, that didn't meet that expectation, that didn't do those things. But I always make sure and I always recognize and I always put this forward that on my grandmother's side, that our first relationship was this. When he started and they registered him in school, he was no longer Wamni Hukshina. He was no longer Charles Ryder Jr. His name was actually taken away. And what was replaced was a number. And the number that they gave him was 118. So my grandfather had a lot of pride and a lot of knowing and understanding. And there's so much story that goes behind the names that we have. Those were stripped from him. And what was given to him was a number that classified him and made him a thing, not a human being, lesser than a human being, to be a number. And we think about what that means and how that affects as we go is going to help us with the story that I'm going to share with each and every one of you. So what do we know? What do we need to know about Indigenous story? So each and every one of us, whether we're Indigenous or not, we are Indigenous to some place. We're Indigenous to a place or somewhere where we come from. And a lot of the question is, why do we have an Indigenous storytelling month? Why is that a thing? And I used to work for a very large provincial school division. And, while I was working in this like extremely large provincial school division, the question that would always come to me is like, Chris, why do we have to focus so much on Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous culture and Indigenous storytelling? Why do we have to focus so much time and effort on that when I got a class full of people that come from all different places? I got a bunch of people from Syria. I got some people from Africa. I got some people in my class, and I only have one Indigenous person. And I'm supposed to focus so much of my knowledge and time on that. And I'd look at him and I'm like, yes, you do. And here's the reason why, because there's an answer to that. And I want to share that with all of you is that, let's say, for example, I was a German person living in Canada and I'm living here and I lost my German culture, my German song, my German dance, my German way of knowing, and my German drinking ability. Let's say I lost all those things and they're nowhere around and I couldn't find a space and I couldn't find a place to do that. Where would I go to regain those? So I asked this question, where do I go to regain that? And they're like, oh, Chris, you'd go to Germany. And I said, exactly. I would get on a plane and I would fly to Germany because I would expect this as the moment that I land, that I would be immersed in German language, German culture, German ways of knowing, German identity, German foundational beliefs, and German dance. I would be able to access that knowledge because that's where that knowledge was born, out of the earth of that place. And then I look at the teacher, I look at the educator, and I say, okay, so let's switch this now. I'm Nakota. I lost my Nakota language, my Nakota tradition, my Nakota dance, my Nakota way of knowing, my Nakota art. I lost my Nakota good looks. Where can I go to regain that? And they look at me and not knowing, and I'd say, nowhere. There is no plane ticket that I can buy to another territory or land that I would go to regain that, because that knowledge exists on this earth. It is here. It is right around us. It lives and it breathes in the space that we are. And we should expect that any of our visitors and all of our relations should be immersed in that knowledge, that they should understand the territory that they live on, that they should understand the language and the ways of knowing that they live on, just like I would if I was Irish and I went to Ireland, just like I would if I was Maori and I lived in New Zealand. I expect that that knowledge exists in those spaces, and we should believe that and understand that and know that. We should celebrate it. We should bring it up and boost it up. And that's what we need to know about Indigenous story, is that we need to tell this because it exists on this land. The moment we stop telling Indigenous story is the moment that it slowly disappears from the space and place in which we live. So we can't we can't accept that as citizens of this land, of Indigenous land and Indigenous territory. We cannot be complicit in the elimination or eradication of that land or language or culture. We can't. It is impossible for us to do that as human beings. So we need to prepare ourselves and help ourselves get into the space and place. So that's what we need to know about Indigenous story before we start this, before I start telling story, is that this is something that we all are responsible for. Each and every one of us that are existing and breathing and living on this land and territory, we are all responsible to make sure that we uplift the knowledge that was originally here. And what it's going to do for Indigenous people, it's going to boost our identity and our function in this space. But for non-Indigenous people, it's going to create what a lot of people talk about in terms of reconciliation. We're going to start breaking down barriers and start creating some really positive stories moving forward. But that can't happen if we don't participate and believe in this knowledge. So here we go. So this right here is that you see on your screen right here. This is a lot of the work that I've done throughout my PhD and some of the research that's there, but it's not created by me. You know, this is not Indigenous knowledge is not something that we just create and we just talk about and we say, I put an ownership manual or a copyright sticker in the corner. That's not what this is. This right here is something that I refer to as the sacred hoop. This is our original education system. It transfers and transcends into so many different areas of the whole being of a person. So I want to tell a story about this. I want to share a story with each and every one of you. And, you know, it's very important for you all to know that the original piece of this comes from a lady by the name of Vera Manuel, as well as my late uncle Arsene Tatusis and my aunt Kim Tatusis. They do a similar structure around Native family systems. But what I did was when I looked at this, I really looked at it as creating this original education, how we help and support our kids, how we help and support our kids in schools and education to break those barriers that were established by colonialism. So when we start and when we live our lives, as was told previously by Joe Lee, we live and we exist in this realm. I guess some people call it spirit world, some people call it heaven, but we live in this other space, this beautiful space. We live and we exist, and we're told that that space is where the stars are. It's where the stars exist. That we are descendants of that space and time. So there was a moment for all of us, for each and every one of us, that we got to be and we got to choose. And from that place, we get to observe the earth. We get to observe this planet, this beautiful life. We get to observe what that is and see what that is. And in that space where the creator is and where all of our ancestors are, where we come from, where we go to, we get to select our parents. So there was a time where there was children that get to see and get to look at what kind of experience they wanted in their life, what kind of experience happens in their life. So they observe this, they see this, and then when they decide, then there's a path that happens, and this path connects to the center. So at the middle of this, in the middle of this circle, there's a star. That star represents the human being, that represents us. So if this were my story that I'm telling you, that star is me. So when I got to choose who my parents were going to be, and I got to choose the experience that I was going to have in my life, I looked down and I seen a path. And that path connects us through our mother's umbilical cords. So when we do that, when we understand that umbilical cord is so important, then we also understand a really important story. When I was 12 years old, I was at school, and you're 12 years old and you're kind of crazy and you kind of do like weird things, and like weird, I mean, like, stuff's happening in your world. And at this time, a bunch of us boys were running around and we were chasing girls. And not only were we chasing girls on that playground, but we were also saying rude and disrespectful things to them. And, we were just being like these adolescent boys were at the time. And all of a sudden we got busted on the playground. And while we were busted on the playground, all of a sudden we got called in the office after recess. So we walked into the office, we walked into this space. The principal had this letter sitting on his desk, looked me right in the eyes and said, "Chris, did you say these words?" And I looked down and I read them and I said, "Yes, I did." And she took that, she folded that letter up and she said, "I need you to take this to your grandma. And your grandma needs to sign this and you need to bring it back to school tomorrow." And I said, "Oh, okay." Man, after school, we had these letters from the principal. All of us boys and my friends, we thought we were really, really something, man. We were just feeling proud about these letters, feeling that we were going to be really good, like, oh, everybody just sees these kids and, they're bad, that's a good thing. So what happens is I take this letter and I get on the bus, and man, we're just proud of these letters, and I cruise home. And I get off on the approach, of my house. We all get dropped off there, my cousins and I walk over to my grandmother's house, and I walk into the door, and I put the letter on the table on the counter, and I go and sit in the living room, and my grandmother was in the kitchen. She was cooking and preparing some supper, and I hear her open the letter, rip that tear of paper. I hear her unfold it. And she looks at it, and I can hear her reading almost. And now 2 things would happen when I was in trouble as a child. My grandmother would say 2 things. She never hit me. She never raised her voice. I never heard her say a mean thing about anybody. But my grandmother was a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt of the mind. She can get into my head and she can just kick the heck out of it. And you just be leaving, just suffering from this brain ninja kind of piece that she would give you. And so 2 things would happen. She said, "Oh, my boy, don't do that. That would be the one I'd want, man. That's the one I want," because it would end there. And the next one would be, "My boy, come here. I need to talk to you." So I hear this envelope opening up and I hear this thing happening. all of a sudden this envelope is there and she's reading this letter and she says, "My boy, come here, I need to talk to you." I was like, "Oh, damn, all right, here we go then." So I get up on a chair from the living room and I walk into the kitchen and I sit at the table and I'm watching her back's to the stove, and she's wearing this apron and she's looking at me. She said, "You know what?" She said, "You know my brother Big Boy?" And I said, "Yeah." "Do you know that's not his real name, my boy?" I was like, "What?" I thought my grandma's brother's name was Big Boy. Like that's all we ever knew him as our whole life. I thought that was his actual name. She's like, "No, his name was Andrew. His name is Andrew," she said. I'm like, "Huh." She said, "But I'm gonna tell you a story as to why we call him that," she said. I was like, "Oh, okay." She said, "When I was 5 years old," she said, "my mother was gonna have a baby." Oh, I was so excited, my boy. I was so excited about it. It's 5 years old, it's gonna happen. And she said this was in the 30s, it was on Assiniboine Reserve, she said. And all of a sudden, she said the time was coming. It was the day. So this is the day that this baby was going to come. My aunt came to watch us kids outside, and she said, yeah, my aunt was watching us, and all of a sudden, my dad come out of the house, and he come over and he start talking Indian to my aunt, and all of a sudden, he said, "I gotta go." He said in Nakota, he said, "I'm gonna go to Santa Luda to get the I'm gonna go get the I'm gonna go to Santa Luda to go grab the um, doctor, and I gotta come back." Oh, and he said, "Oh man, her aunt." She said, her aunt was worried. Her aunt said a prayer for her brother-in-law, so that he would return safely, because she said, "My boy, at the time Indians weren't allowed to leave the reserve. There was this thing called the pass system, and if we didn't get approval from the Indian agent, the RCMP would come and then they would fine or else jail us if we couldn't afford to pay the fine." And my father was the one who was the one that looked after all of us. So it was dangerous. If he left, we wouldn't eat. It was a very scary thing, my boy. But he went, and my aunt prayed for him, prayed for her brother-in-law to return safely. And sure enough, they start coming on horse and wagon, and they're making their way back. And he came with the doctor, and they went into the house where my grandmother's mother was. And while she was in there, my grandmother started to build up that excitement again. "The doctor's here, the baby's coming. It's gonna be awesome. I can't wait," she said. So she started to pace around their little one-room house, this shack on the Assiniboine Reserve, and started to pace around. And sure enough, not too long after, this 5-year-old girl heard a baby cry. Holy smokes. My grandmother got excited. She was so pumped. She ran into the house as fast as she could. And she ran in there, and she seen blood everywhere. There's blood on the bed, blood all over. And she looked at her mother laying on that bed, and she held up this baby. She held him up and looked at him while she's laying there. And she said, "Oh, what a big boy. What a big boy." My grandmother looked at me, she said, and that was the last thing that my mother said. She passed away after that. And she looked at me again and she said, my boy, that this is why, she said, we don't say these things to our women. This is why we don't say this to our, we don't be disrespectful to them. Because every month women give of themselves in order to bring life into this world. That they have a special gift that they give here, that they have here. Sometimes, she said, we give our life to bring life into this world, like my mother did. So you're not only saying these things to these girls around the playground, you're also saying them to me, and you're saying them to my mother. So I want to ask you, my boy, not to do this anymore. And that was the end of that story. Now I'm going to tell you, I remember every single aspect of that conversation. I remember the apron she was wearing. I remember the tablecloth on the table. I remember what was cooking on supper. I remember the bobby pins in her hair. And I'm going to tell you that story taught me about life and death, the human reproductive system, life in the 30s for Indian people, the past system. It taught me about menstrual cycle. It taught me about respect, kindness. It taught me all those things. And I don't remember a single thing I learned in health class. I don't remember a single thing that taught me and reached that level of remembering. And my grandmother shared all of that beauty in a story. She shared all of that power in a story. And she showed those things, and she taught me that very important lesson when I was 12 years old. And I remember all of it. And since that moment when I was 12, all the way up until my age right now, I've never ever said anything like that to be disrespectful to our women, to our mothers, because I always reminded of how beautiful that was. And that's the story that she shared with me. That's the type of beauty that exists within Indigenous knowledge. We're doing Indigenous storytelling, and we're talking about Wisagi Jack, and we're talking about Trickster, and we're doing all of these, I guess what colonial education would tell us is mythology. But we have so much avenues for story that exist. Now, when I was a little kid, I was hyper, and I'd be all over the place doing different things, digging around in different places. And the old people would say, he's searching for his belly button. And I used to think that was such a weird thing to say to a kid. What does that even mean? But as soon as I say that to people and I'm telling that story, all the Indian people in the audience are like, yeah, I got told that too. But when my son was born, there was a lessons that were taught, or protocols that were taught in order to do. And in these protocols, the belly button is a huge part of that protocol for when babies are born. So my grandmother taught me and told me these Nakota ways and Nakota understanding of that for us. Now, my wife, she's Cree, amazing, powerful, beautiful mother to my children, and such an amazing woman and partner, and always I'm able to do work because of her. So my grandmother told me all these Nakota ways and what we're supposed to do. And I'm like, heck yeah, man, we're going to do this Nakota way. We're going to raise these Nakota children. And after my grandmother told me all this protocol, she looked at me and she said, but your kids are Cree. And I was like, niche. I was like, okay. I was like, so you told me all that, and then you tell me that. And she's like, I want you to go and I want you to talk to your mother-in-law. I want you to ask her about protocols for Cree children, she said. And that's what I want you to, that's what I want you to raise your children like that, because that's what they are, she told me. And she said, doesn't mean that they're not Nakota, she said, but that's an important part of who they are. And their mother, but what she was telling me is that her mother's Cree. And because our mothers bring life into this world, that I needed to make sure and follow that tradition for her. She didn't say it in those words, but that's what she was telling me. So I did. I went over there and I start talking to my mother-in-law, and then she had to ask different people. And all of a sudden she says to me, she phones me back and she says, Chris, introduce yourself in Cree. And I said, holy smokes, she's a Cree language instructor, Jedi master. Her name's Julia Olette. She does repeat after me Cree lessons on social media. So if you get a chance, Google her. She's famous. I don't know if she is or not. She's a monster-in-law, but Cree language, she's pretty good. And she's definitely not on here, so I can talk about her. So anyways, she said, introduce yourself in Cree. I was like, holy cow, okay, all right. I said, Chris Scribe Nitsigasin. She said, yep. She said, what does that word mean to you? I was like, which one? Nitsigasin? She's like, yeah. I said, well, that means my name is. She's like, nope. Our Cree, our language is descriptive, she said to me. She looked at me. Describes. If you can describe something, there's a Cree word for it. And I was like, oh, yeah, I knew that. She said, think about a table. In English, a table is a table. It doesn't have no meaning. There's no life. But in Cree, it's mitsunatik, this wooden structure that we gather to eat on. It's like, man, that just brings life to that. And she looked at me, she said, our words are made up to describe these different things. The root word, the most important word in when you introduce yourself is mitsi. So what does that mean? And I thought, and I was like, it means belly button, doesn't it? And I thought I was gonna get it wrong. She's like, yeah. She said, when we introduce ourselves, we use nitsi, our belly button, as our introduction. And I thought, huh. And immediately I thought about, those stories, those old people saying he's looking for his belly button. So when we introduce ourselves in the Cree language and we say Chris Scribe Nitsigasan, I'm not saying my name is Chris Scribe. I am saying that I exist and function on this earth because a mother brought me here. I exist and function because she fed me through an umbilical cord. That she brought me into this world. That I chose her when I was in the stars. Man, that just blew my mind that we would describe that in one single word. That when we say that, we acknowledge the power of our women, we acknowledge how amazing that is and how powerful that is, and what a gift that is, that we exist here because a mother brought us. And that discussion and that conversation, it allowed me to heal the relationship with my own mother. It allowed me the ability to understand more better, because our relationship with my own mother was not always good. I didn't know her till I was in my 20s. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know where her family is or anything like that. But that conversation when my son was going to be born and the protocols that associated with it, that every time that I say prescribe Netsigas and I uplift and I acknowledge that my mother brought me to this earth, that she fed me through that umbilical cord, which is a connection to the Creator. Man, that's wicked. I just thought, oh man, that's deadly. And then all of these things started to come into, started to click, because my son's going to be born. I'm going to have my first kid. They start to click. And that we introduce ourselves and we travel on this umbilical cord. And when we travel on that, our mothers feed us. And then right at the top of that star, you see that line that goes up? That's our entry point into earth and the sacred hoop of life. So we enter in there. And as we travel up until that line where it says children's connection, that whole place right there is about 7 years, from birth to 7 years. In this time frame, we have a soft spot in our head. In that time frame, from birth to 7 years, we're also taught that we don't yell, hit, we don't be disrespectful. We show our children healthy relationships, kindness, love, generosity. We sing those lullabies. We make sure that we provide them all the kindness and beauty that earth provides us. We make sure we show hard work, dedication. We show that our respect for our elders and our knowledge keepers and our siblings. Because when that soft spot is open, our children are absorbing everything around them. They're absorbing the knowledge, the songs, the kindness, whatever they put into that, in that space, whatever they gain, whatever they have access to, is what builds their foundation in who they are. It helps them relive that. And then when the soft spot closes, we travel down onto where it says in between rites of passage and children's connection. In there, our children learn to play with one another. In there, they listen to our elders tell story. They tell story about creation, about life. They tell funny stories to make sure that the kids are engaging with everything. We make our kids laugh. We teach them games that also have story attached to them. So we're building them the capacity for them to know and understand. So when they hear it later in life, it's going to be there in their memory, in their blood memory. So we're tapping into the ancestral memory that they have already. And then this beautiful experience happens with our children as they go through a rites of passage. For girls, it's when they get their moon time, and when boys, their voice changes. At this moment in time, it's a huge celebration. It's something that we uplift one another and we help each other, and we bring people together in ceremony and protocol. We celebrate the beauty of what that means. Our journey into adulthood, into manhood and womanhood. We understand how powerful those relationships are. And we share those and we celebrate those. And then they go into this, what I call Jedi training. So they go into this training where we're training their Padawans, are learning to be Jedis of this knowledge, of Indigenous knowledge, of their nation's knowledge. They're learning it, they're absorbing it, they're taking it in. They're actively participating in the things that we're telling. And then our elders are observing and watching them. They're seeing how maybe somebody's got a gift in this in storytelling. Maybe somebody's got a gift in this area over here. And man, they just identifying the gifts that our children have. And our elders would say that everybody has a gift. And they'd help them in those Jedi trainings to get them all prepared to be the best that they can. And in between this rites of passage, Jedi training into the knowledge and action, another change of life happens. That change of life is when we start to bring our children into this world and we become parents. When we start to become aunties and uncles, when we start to take these roles that are very, very important in our communities, we start to get into this place right here where we start to make mistakes. We start to actively participate in our governance, start to actively participate in leading our ceremonies. We start to actively participate in all these really important things that keep our people together. But we're also making sure that we're reminding our children and showing them how beautiful our life is. So we wrap our kids in a moss bag as parents. We put them in a cradle board. We put the cradle board in the ground and they let them observe us. So we be kind to our partners. We love our partners. We make sure that we show them what hard work and how we communicate and how we work together in those times. Because our kids are absorbing all of this thing, everything that we're showing them. And then we're also in this space where we're learning to take the lead on songs. We're learning to take the lead on protocol and ceremony. We're learning to take the lead on governance. All of these things are carefully guided and carefully watched by our elders and our knowledge keepers. They're there to make sure that we are doing things the way that they're supposed to be done, that we're making sure that we're following with the true intent of what it was that we were. So if we notice that, for example, that we're being rude and disrespectful in front of our children, our elders and our knowledge keepers would correct us, because we're not all perfect. We need that. We need to make mistakes if we're going to learn. And our knowledge keepers and our elders come forward and they share that with us and remind us. So as we go, another rites of passage happens in our life. That other rites of passage is when we get into what I call eldership, when our hair turns gray and when women go through menopause. At this time, again, it's a huge celebration. We uplift, we become grandparents. And we become the ones that tell the story. We become the ones that share the knowledge. We become the ones that make sure that we're doing things the way that they're supposed to be done. And we get into that space. And as the elders get older and they're returning back on that circle, back to the stars and to the Creator, we're reminded that we don't yell at them. We're not mean to them. We don't say anything unkind, that we are respectful because they're absorbing everything that we're giving. And not only are they observing it, but they're going to go back and they're going to share with our relatives their experience on this earth. So we have to make sure that we share kindness and love and generosity to all of them. And then they return back to the stars. They return back to where the Creator is. They become our ancestors. They become the ancestors that watch us and look out for us. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is our sacred hoop of knowledge. All of us that are Indigenous to this land, or all of us that are Indigenous in some place and have this here. There is no such thing as losing language, losing culture, losing identity. Because if you have a belly button and you were brought to this earth by a mother, you can always reconnect to the sacred hoop. It's always going to be there for you. It's never going to disappear. So we can always reconnect and find those. Sometimes we need a little help in order to do that. Now, this is how beautiful our knowledge was. This is how difficult it was. This is how hard it was. And now you think about our experiences of my great-grandfather as he walked into Regina Industrial School at 6 years. So he had the beauty and kindness. He understood this knowledge into what it was and how it is. But at age 6 years old, all of that was thrown out the window. And he was shown the ugliness of what's out there. He was shown verbal, physical, sexual abuse that happened in these spaces. He was shown that we cry at these schools. He was shown all of this ugliness. So a shift started to happen in the relationship. And pretty soon, his children experienced it early, and their children experienced it even earlier. So now we get to a point in our history of Indigenous people where we forgot about that belly button. We forgot about that foundation, forgot about Ntsigasan, forgot about Ntsi. And pretty soon our children are experiencing and they're seeing unhealthy relationships happen right before their eyes. Kids that are 1 year old are being yelled at, being sworn at. Children are being hit at these ages when we're supposed to be showing them kindness and love and beauty. So a shift is happening. And pretty soon, what's really happening is these kids are losing their connection to their belly buttons. They're looking for it. So they go through this experience, and all of a sudden, the songs aren't being told to them, stories aren't being shared with them. They go to rites of passage, and our girls are told that when they go through their first moon time, that it's disgusting, that they need to make sure and keep that a secret. Don't tell anybody. Make sure that you hide it, that you don't celebrate it. And our boys, we start to make fun of them and shame them and start to tell them that, okay, now you're a man now. So now it's your job to go and do these manly things. Totally opposite of what our original hoop tells us. Totally opposite of what we're supposed to do as Indian people. And then all of a sudden things get changed. Now we're not doing Jedi training anymore. Now what's ending up happening in our lives is that we are searching for Natsigas and we're searching for our belly button. And in this moment in time, we try fill it with things that make us feel good right now. So we think about things that make us feel good right now. We think about the unhealthy things that exist in our lives, drugs and alcohol, gangs, unhealthy relationships. All of those things make us feel good immediately. What about gambling? That option of going into those spaces and all of a sudden you win something and that makes you feel good right now, but it doesn't last, it disappears. So a lot of our people, as they go through this space, they are experiencing that loss and they're trying to fill it, trying to fill that void with their identity, trying to fill it with the things that are missing. And we're losing a lot of that. And pretty soon our elders get into this realm where our old people are getting into this realm where they're supposed to be in their elderships, but they're at an infant level of knowledge in terms of their sacred hoop. So our parents and our grandparents were in that space. So when my grandmother took me at the age of 59, she told me later on in life that she made a decision that she was going to be the one to raise me. She wanted to raise somebody that was proud of who they are. Wanted to raise somebody around ceremony to make sure that was always there as a foundation of who I was. She made this decision, so we followed each other on this sacred hoop. She provided that to me from the age of 59 until she left this world back to our ancestors. And together we traveled along that. So now I have a responsibility to raise my children earlier in that space. And I make mistakes. But this is part of it, is that we tell story, that we share story all along the way. Probably have about 10 minutes, ish. I don't know if they're gonna cut me off, but oh well, I only got invited to OTC once in my life, so I'm gonna take every second I can from them. Anyways, I want to share this. You're not supposed to read PowerPoint presentations. That's presenting 101, but I'm going to read it. I don't even care. I see quite clearly today as to the reason for establishing and setting forth our position on this issue and why we did last fall for our children to clearly understand their Cree language, to learn to love an education that integrates and accommodates their identity And secondly, to combat and capture the dropout rate of our youth before any more are dismayed or discouraged from continuing. They should be made that they are happy that they are there. In this way, they will learn in their most formative years to love learning, knowing about things, knowledge that they should keep and remember. If we can accomplish this, what will happen is this: when they enter schools of higher levels, they won't quit. John B. Tatusis said that in 1976. And I can get on a stage and I can do a keynote and I can say that exact same quote and it would be relevant today. We have a collective responsibility as parents and as community members to make sure that in 40 years that we are not saying the same things and they are not relevant. We have a responsibility to make sure that we tell every story that we can and uplift the beauty of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous story. We take those, we do everything in our power to make sure that that happens. That is the challenge that I give to the people that are on this call. Our Indigenous story today and why it's relevant and meaningful and inspirational and all those things is because of land, language, and culture. We need to reconnect to our sacred hoop, and how we do that is through story. There are people out there that carry story. They're not the ones that are putting up their hands saying, I'm gonna do that, I can come tell a story, you give me an honorary and I'm there. They're the ones sitting at home waiting for us to go visit them with tobacco and drink a cup of tea. So find our elders and our knowledge keepers. I watched this really cool video of a lady by the name of Serene Fox, who realized that during COVID, we lost so many elders and knowledge keepers, and that she needed to make sure that she went forward and collected these stories so that she can pass them on to a future family and generations. All of us should have that type of attitude, COVID or not, as we should move forward. We exist on the stories we tell ourselves. We are the stories that we tell ourselves. So what story do we tell about our existence on this earth? What is the story that we tell each other? Now, there's a story that existed, and I'm going to quote my friend who just recently passed away. His name was Harold Johnson. Harold Johnson is a phenomenal human being. I mean, out of control, deadly Jedi. He's Yoda. And Harold Johnson said that there's a story that's told about Indian people, that we are drunks, that we're uneducated, that we're no good. That's the story that was told to us, and we ended up telling ourselves that. My grandmother made sure that the story that I told myself wasn't that. That with the creator, with the ceremony, with the knowledge of being who I am, if that's at my back, there's nothing that can stop me. That's the story that I tell myself every single day and every single aspect that I can. Whatever challenges come up, that's the story I tell myself. So what story do our children, what are our stories our children telling? And we offer opportunities to switch that for them. These are the things we need to do. Should you have the opportunity to do this work? If we exist on this place, we need to connect to Indigenous knowledge this way. We need to be relevant. It needs to be relevant to the territory in which we're living in. It needs to be relevant to our families and who we are. We need to know who our knowledge keepers are. We need to know and find them and locate them and sit down and visit them, just like you're going to go to a university class. Use a decolonizing lens on everything you do, even if you're not Indigenous. Because once you put the lens on, then you're going to see how beautiful our people are, how beautiful the knowledge is. And if you combine that with the knowledge that you have already, the possibilities are endless. We need to ask the right questions about ourselves, ask the right questions about other people. We need to make sure that we actively participate in asking proper questions, because when we go in it unprepared to a knowledge keeper, when we go into unprepared to a storyteller, and we're not sharing the right questions, you can sit there and talk about the Super Bowl halftime show for 3 hours and miss an opportunity of learning. Number 5, know and speak your truth. We gotta own what that means. Every chance that we get to speak truth, whether it's easy or not, needs to be told and needs to be shared. We need to be a space creator. We create space for our children. We create space for people. What that means is that you don't have to assimilate or hide your identity in order to be successful in this world. Don't be afraid to fail. This is the biggest barrier that every one of us have. I don't want to teach Indigenous knowledge. I don't want to teach an Indigenous story, because if I do and I do it wrong, someone's going to get mad at me. Well, heck yeah, there is. It's just like me. If I'm going to write a research paper, submit it to SSHRC for a big grant, and I don't put a citation page, I don't put any authors to back me up, they're going to reject that and they're going to get mad and say, why are you submitting this? Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous story is the same way. You need to acquire it you need to have a citation. You need to be able to cite where the knowledge comes from, who it comes from, because that protects you as the person that's sharing knowledge. Not owning it, sharing it. And number 8, check your ego. Ego is the biggest, most, hurtful piece that can have. If you think that you are something special, that nobody is as good as you and you're the best there ever was, or all that kind of stuff, you've already had it. You need to get out of this Indigenous knowledge story sharing and that piece. You get out, open a Tim Hortons or a Walmart or something and make $1 billion. It's not what this is about. We need to check our egos and understand and humble ourselves. That we all exist on this earth because a mother brought us here. And that's all that really matters in that whole space. So there's that. The most beautiful human being, and I'm going to end on this one and I'll stop talking here. The most beautiful human being that I've ever known is in this picture right here. This is who raised me. This is who shared with me story and knowledge and 1,000 lessons, whether we were baking pies, sitting around playing cards, or just visiting. She shared with me how important and valuable and kind and loving we are as Indigenous people. That our stories are alive, that our language is alive, that it has spirit, that we're connected to the earth, not as somebody that lives on it, but lives with it. She shared all of this, and her knowledge that she had and how she shared it, it allowed me to be where I am today, sitting and talking to all of you. We all have someone like my grandmother in our lives, and if we don't, we build relations, because that's what we do as Indigenous people on this territory. We go out and we find and we build our relations, we talk about them, and we find this resource. Find out who that is for you. If we don't, then we're going to perpetuate a space where kids are going to always be looking for who they are. Through story, we have the ability to influence the lives of our children. Story-inspired children then take their knowledge to the dinner table and change the narrative. If our children are enthused and excited about Indigenous story, then we need to do that. We need to change the narrative. We need to change it from Kiskanamatogawigamik. That's the word for a schoolhouse. That's the word they came up with when they started residential schools. And there's a word in there. There's words. There's one word that means to understand. There's one word that means a building. And then there's a word in the middle that means to cry. So the narrative for how we share knowledge in our system, in our colonial system, is based on a foundation of the building where we go to learn to cry. We can't change that narrative. It's hard for us. The ones that are going to do it are our kids, because our kids have power. Our kids are genius level thinkers, and our kids can make parents and grandparents do just about anything. So we make sure and we put all of our focus and energy on supporting them as we move forward. I'm not going to talk about that. That's a trucker convoy conversation, this one. You get that on the adult conversation later on. Storytelling is more than feathers and medicine wheels on a worksheet. When we have the opportunity to share a story, let's collectively do it. There it is. I want to say thank you, Wopara Tonka Padamaya, for listening, and I hope you guys got a little bit out of it. You know, when I started, I invited our relatives here to stand with me, to be with me today. I invited my grandmother and my grandfather to be here with me, and I asked them, and I prayed before I started, and I asked them that give me the right words to share and to talk about, not to make sure that storytelling happens forever all the time, but to give a spark to the people that listen, and a spark that hopefully they take back and build a fire. Wherever you are, in the space that you are, build a fire. And with that fire, I want you to burn down a colonial institution. And no, just kidding. I want you to build up our kids and build up what we do moving forward. Hi, Kanana Skumten. Thank you all very much. You guys are deadly. And I think, you know, we're done, Adi.
Okay, awesome.
3:55.
Right on the dot. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. Thank you everybody for joining us today. And thank you to Jolie as well for making the time to share that knowledge and help educate us. I'd like to thank the staff at the OTC for making this all possible, as well as keeping this space safe for us. Thank you so much. Join us February 18th at 1:30. We'll be having Senator Nora Cummings come join us to share stories of the Road Allowance people, and Peter Nippy sharing wellness and healing through teachings of Waisake Chak. So thank you so much everybody for making it. And if you do have questions, please email us and let us know. And hope you guys have a great day. Hi, miigwech. Thank you.